the proposal. Comments were received from a member of the public, Sandra Hood. She has raised concern over the size and scale of the proposal and is particularly concerned over parking, traffic congestion, the visual prominence of such a tall building in the area, and the overall impact to the heritage character of the downtown. So additional review is still needed to adequately assess the appropriateness of the proposal in the downtown area and opportunity to address any concerns that are brought forward as part of the circulation and commenting process. So at this time, staff does respectfully recommend that the committee refer the application back to staff for further review and processing to consider comments received after the report was written, comments that will be received as part of this public hearing, and to receive further outstanding comments from departments and agencies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, David, for that presentation. I guess we will now go to, is it Kent or member of ECO? There's Kent's on there this morning, or afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kent Randall. I'm the principal planner at EcoView Consulting. We're, of course, the planners for the owners, J18 Corp. I'm joined here today by one of the members of the ownership group, Tommy Zhao. And we also have Mangdi Zhen, who is the architect of this building. So let me just start off by saying that we're very excited to be bringing this to you today. This is a culmination of a couple of years of review of the site and technical analysis. As David pointed out, it is unlike anything that's been brought forward to the city. But we're excited about that, and we think it's something that fits within the context of the area and can be a successful development for the city. We believe that it is in an ideal location. Above all else, it's in the downtown, but it's not quite. It's just on the periphery of the central core in terms of the designation and its location. So it's not within the Heritage District, but it's just outside of the downtown. So you have the amenities of the downtown at your disposal, but you're also in an area that should not impact the heritage characteristics of the downtown. And that's obviously a big thing. And as David pointed out, we have done a heritage impact assessment. It's been submitted. And the heritage plan did find that there were no issues in terms of visual impact. We've also done a shadow impact study, in which also shows that there won't be any negative impacts to the surrounding lands. So, we've obviously taken into consideration that this is taller than what's in anything in the town, the former town, at this moment. But we feel like it is an ideal location. It checks off all the boxes in terms of modern planning standards and provincial policy. The city requires 50% of its growth to occur within the built boundary of settlement areas. That's what we're doing here. That's one thing. It's also, it represents intensification, higher density. It's providing something that's in demand, residential units that are in demand, rental units for retirees and seniors. That's obviously something that's heavily in demand and is in short supply within the city. So, and it's also redeveloping a site that's underutilized, obviously, and has seen its number of its share of different users and businesses that have come and gone through there. So we believe that it is an ideal site for this. We think it's an exciting project for the city. It's a landmark. It's something that hopefully, as we go through this process and we come out of it, when something is up there, it's something that the city can be proud of. So I'll leave it at that. Obviously, this is the opportunity for us to hear what the committee has to say and what the public has to say. So we're happy to take questions and provide any clarification where needed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kent, for that presentation. We'll start with members of committee. Members of committee, do we have any questions of David or Kent at this time? Mayor Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Certainly seems like it checks a lot of the boxes for needs in our community, and I know whenever something different, unique, never been done before, certainly gets everybody's attention as well. One question I have is regarding one of the article on page 4 of 8 of the report. It says the Downtown Lindsay Heritage Conservation District lies to the south, and a heritage impact assessment was requested to assess the impact. So I'm curious as to why this is a proposal that isn't even in the heritage district, but we're asking for a heritage impact assessment on how it would affect that district, even though it's not in that district. I mean, I'm just a little bit confused. I would assume you would have to do that if you were in the heritage district, obviously, but being out of it, we're still looking on how it impacts the heritage district. Is that kind of the gist of what it is there?
Through the chair, I'll do my best to explain on ECDEB's behalf. But in essence, yes. So my understanding of what was told to me is the Ontario Heritage Act, when providing protection through these designations, does control for character in the sites that are immediately beyond these designated areas, and that's why it was requested.
Okay, I didn't know that, so thank you. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense to me, but I didn't know that. Thank you.
Any further questions, Mayor Latham? No, any members of the committee? Seeing none? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
One of the notices here from Human Services says that a portion of the 207 units can be either rented or sold at an affordable level. And I wonder, are all these apartments rental, or are they to be sold as separate condo units, or will there be a portion that will be affordable as well?
The chair to Member Barkwell. It's at this point they are rental. They will strictly be rental units moving forward. There's no plans to provide any of those as affordable units at this point. I'm not sure if that's something that we would consider or the applicants would consider in the future, but at this point there's no affordable units as part of that.
Just following up on that, Kent, is it much of a process, or to our planners, if they wanted these rentals to be sold as condominiums?
Not, Mr. Chair, not really, not necessarily. What we would normally do is go through what's called a condo exemption under the Condominium Act in situations where there's a public process that's involved with developing the site, or for instance, let's say apartment buildings like here. After the fact, if they were to be sold or condoized, I guess, in that sort of ownership structure, that could be done through a condo exemption. I would leave it with staff to confirm that.
No, you do see them quite often in Toronto. A lot of the old apartment buildings are getting condominiumized, so I just wondered if there was much of a... Thanks very much. I'll ask for members of the public. Is there any members of the public that would wish to speak to this application? Any members of the public that wish to speak to this application? I don't think we have anybody, do we, Joel?
We had the owner, the architect, and then I believe Sandra Hood is on the line. And we were trying to get the audio for Sandra. If she did unmute. Are you speaking, Sandra? We can't hear her.
Okay.
So we did give her the option to call in. However, correspondence has been received and circulated to the members of the committee if we're unable to hear from Sandra, who is participating on the Zoom today.
Okay. I believe Ms. Hood is one of the three farthest most one to the west, number 6 on the plan. The houses are back onto the project, so we don't seem to be have connections. So anyways, seeing no one else wishes to speak to this application, there is a recommendation in our meeting today. What's the committee's wishes? It's to refer back. Councillor Vail? As printed. Do I sign Councillor Seymour Fagan? Any discussion on the motion? Referred back. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next application is an application on to amend the Township of Bexley zoning bylaw, identified as 1093 North Bay Drive on Kirkfield. And Kent Stanton is there's Kent. Go ahead, Kent. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I just wanted to make a correction that this is actually in the geographic township of Bexley. The owner is the Macarios Corporation with Gary James, who is the owner of 1093 North Bay Drive, being the applicant. Notice of the application was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. All registered property owners within 500 meters of the lot were provided notice of the application, and one sign was posted at the entryway to 7 Copes Lane by the city's sign company. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. The application for an amendment to the zoning bylaw relates to a condition of provisional consent for a lot line adjustment, which was development file D03-2018-026, whereby the rural general lands to be severed, which are outlined in red on the slide shown here, are to be rezoned to rural residential type 3 zone to match the zone category of the benefiting lands known as 1093 North Bay Drive. The proposed retained lands, a portion of which is outlined in green on the slide shown here, will remain under the rural general zone category. The associated consent application will address encroachment of an accessory building onto 7 Copes Lane. The application itself does not conflict with the 2020 provincial policy statement and the 2019 growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, as the proposed limits of the severed lot boundary do not appear to extend beyond the disturbed area containing the detached accessory building into the retained agricultural lands. By limiting the amount of severed land, the proposal protects the surrounding agricultural lands and ensures no conflict with the established rural landscape. Next slide, please. The proposal also conforms to the rural and waterfront designation policies of the City of Kawartha Lake's official plan, as a portion of the benefiting lands are situated on the waterfront. The rural designation seeks to protect agricultural lands from fragmentation or uses unrelated to agriculture. Conversely, the rural designation also permits severance for minor lot line adjustments that do not create a separate building lot. The area of the severed land appears to be mowed and of lower quality for agricultural production. The proposed severed lands themselves, as I mentioned, contain an accessory building that appears to function as a cabin. The benefiting lands contain a single detached dwelling that was constructed in 2017. The retained lands also contain a single detached dwelling, as well as several buildings and structures pertaining to an agricultural operation on the subject property. As the rural residential type 3 zone permits a cabin, planning staff are satisfied that the structure on the severed lands will conform to the uses of the RR3 zone and that the accessory building complies with the general provisions of the zoning bylaw. Comments have been received from Engineering Division, Building Division, the Supervisor of Part 8 Sewage Systems, and since the writing of the report, the Community Services Department, all of which have no objections to the proposal. Moreover, no objections were received from the public. As a result, staff respectfully recommends the committee to consider referring the zoning bylaw amendment application to council for approval. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that report, Kent. We'll now hear from the applicant. It says Gary James, and the applicant, do you wish to speak to this application?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Kent has laid that out. I'm only here willing to answer questions if needed.
Thank you very much. We'll just see if just hang on there. Members of committee have any questions of Kent or Mr. James? Looks fairly straightforward. Thank you very much. We'll ask the members of the public, is there anybody that wishes to speak to this application? Anybody wishes to speak to this application? I think we have anybody registered, do we, Ken?
I had a Glenn Stacy join the meeting late. Glenn, if you're able to unmute and turn on your video, if you would like to speak to this application. I'm not sure if this is the one you are joining us for today.
Yeah, so I'm just here as an interested party on behalf of Macarius Corporation.
Okay.
So I don't have anything to speak to the application at all.
Okay. Okay, anyone else, seeing no one else to speak to? Thanks very much. There is a recommendation in our package today. Mayor Letham?
I'll move that it be approved and forwarded to council for adoption.
Seconded by Jason. Discussion? All those in favor? That's carried, and that was that a zoning bylaw amendment respecting application D 06-220-026, substantia in the form attached, Appendix D, Report Plan 2020-060 be approved and adopted by council. Thank you very much. The next application or business on our agenda today is the additional residential units by Anna Kalina. And Anna, like you, thanks very much for this long and lots of work. And Leah's going to join us as well today. I'm sure a lot of work went into this, and thank you for the hard work. And looking forward to your presentation today.
Mr. Chair. So the Policy Shop is back with you today to wrap up our ARUs project, that of course being additional residential units. Now, if you didn't get an advent calendar this year, worry not. We've got 24 amendments to present you with. All right, so that's 5 official plan amendments and 19 zoning bylaw amendments. Let's get into it. Great, so last month's PAC meeting was the first of 2 public meetings associated with ARUs, leaving today's meeting as the second. We're going to explain the revisions we've made to the amendments as a result of further engagement with the province and the public since the November meeting. Because of the extensive body of work attached to our staff report, we want to go over the differences in the multiple official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments with you. We are recommending that all of the proposed amendments be approved. You'll hear a bit more about that in our next steps. So a quick recap on the next slide. At the last PAC meeting, we introduced ARUs. ARUs have recently replaced the province's second units housing concept in the Planning Act. The Act now requires that municipalities permit, through their official plan policies and zoning bylaw provisions, 1 ARU in the same building as the primary residential unit or 1 ARU in the same on the same lot in an accessory building. All right, so effectively, the proposed amendments will allow ARUs on eligible properties as of right. Great, so you'll recall that at the last meeting, we recommended approval of OPA 39, which is the amendment to the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan, as well as the amendment to the Oak Ridges Moraine zoning bylaw. You adopted that recommendation. Thank you. Between then and the November 17th council meeting, we received comments that had the potential to broaden the base of eligible properties, and we wanted an opportunity to consider those comments and ultimately make some changes. In the meantime, the adopting bylaws associated with the OPA 39 and the ORM zoning bylaw amendment were removed from council's agenda to afford us this opportunity today. So with that light overview, Anna will carry on with the heavy lifting and tell you about the revisions that we've made in the last few weeks. Anna.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, committee and chair. So further to our conversation with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, our contact reviewed our proposed policies and zone provisions and had no concerns or issues with our approach. It was, however, reiterated provincial government is very supportive of municipalities facilitating new housing, and that we should approach our amendments with that perspective. This comment and another public comment made us step back and consider how we're interpreting the Planning Act. So originally, we interpreted the provisions to mean that on a lot where there is a primary residential unit, there may be 2 ARUs, basically up to 3 units on a property. In our research, we've seen at least one other municipality take this approach. Mind you, there haven't been many municipalities to adopt ARUs at this time. We decided to allow garden suites together with ARUs, but for consistency, limit all lots to 3 units max. However, when there are more than 1 PRUs on a lot, so primary residential units, as is in the case or could be in the case of semis and towns that may not have been severed along the common wall, the restriction on the PRUs per lot and the 3 unit max makes these housing types ineligible for an ARU. This interpretation of the Planning Act, therefore, is more cautious. So in the spirit of facilitating housing, we're proposing that for every PRU, there may be 2 ARUs. This means that where there's 1 PRU, there may be up to 3 units on a lot. This is the same as in the last illustration. Now with garden suites, they're their own Planning Act tool. And with that, we're proposing that public can combine both ARUs and garden suites, provided their properties are obviously eligible for both types. Garden suites are temporary, and after 10 or 20 years, depending on what was agreed upon with the city, these dwellings will be removed and these lots will be back to 3 units. The effect of removing 1 PRU per lot requirement and removing the maximum of 3 units on a lot is most evident for the semis and towns on unsevered lots, as shown in the bottom illustration. With this interpretation, these housing types are eligible for ARUs. In the illustration, we're going from 2 units on a lot to 6 units on a lot. This can sound a lot, but consider that had there been a severance along the common wall, these semis would have been eligible for 2 ARUs in accordance with the previous interpretation, and on the ground would have resulted in the same number of dwellings. Also, I want to remind you that there are eligibility criteria that still need to be met. And while in theory, every PRU may have 2 ARUs, in practice, some lots may not be eligible for 2 because of lot size or configuration. I want to further emphasize that we're not proposing to change the existing lot requirements for lot coverage. So if the zone requires that there be a minimum 30 or a maximum 30% lot coverage, ARUs are also considered into the 30%. So we've already discussed in the last meeting at the November 4th PAC meeting that to allow ARU citywide, we need to amend all 5 official plans and all 19 zoning bylaws. We're proposing 5 different OPAs and 2 zoning bylaw amendments. In addition to the revisions made, there are differences between the 5 OPs and the 19 zoning bylaws that warranted changes between the policies and zone provisions. And I wanted to go over those in a little bit here. So some of the official plans and zoning bylaws affect urban areas only, and provisions regarding private services, minimum distance separation formula, farm dwelling uses, and garden suites do not apply. And accordingly, we don't have those provisions for urban areas. Also, the Oak Ridges Moraine policies and provisions only apply to the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan and the Oak Ridges Moraine zoning bylaw. As I've mentioned, there are 2 zoning bylaw amendments being proposed. One applies to the Oak Ridges Moraine zoning bylaw, which has not had any substantial changes from the last version you've seen at the November 4th PAC meeting. And the other amendment applies to the remainder 18 of the city's zoning bylaws. The amendment that applies to the 18 zoning bylaws is rather long, and that is because one size does not fit all. Although we're proposing to amend the same sections, being the general provisions and the definitions, there are differences between our zoning bylaws. Not only does the urban-rural context matter, but also we're relying on existing terms, zones, section numbers, and titles in the zoning bylaws that differ from one bylaw to the next. For example, some zoning bylaws define the term improved public street versus others could be defining it as improved street, or the same zone that protects environmental features could be titled environmental protection zone or hazard zone or open space, depending on the bylaw. Furthermore, only Lindsay zoning bylaw has maximum gross floor area requirements that we've determined need to be exempt to allow ARUs. Lastly, the same section could be numbered and in a few cases even titled differently in different zoning bylaws. For this, I'm providing an example of the accessory building structures and uses section. So we are at a point zoning bylaw amendments for approval. We have also attached the updated registration bylaw for your information that we are also recommending for council approval. Provided these amendments are recommended today to council and at the council meeting on December 15th, the amendments are approved. Following that, there will be a notice of decision published in the paper and followed by a 20-day appeal period. A reminder that the appeal rights are limited to just the minister. And the appeal period will end mid-January 2021, which is when the ARU policies are expected to come into effect. To date, we've already received inquiries and interest in ARUs from the public. Once in effect, staff will prepare informational resources such as FAQs and or how-to guides for the public and we'll make them available on the city's website. As well as we'll make available ARU registration form, and that will also be available on the website for interested parties. And that is it for the presentation component. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Leah and Anna, and I'll ask members of committee if they have any questions on the report. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Anna, will there be a requirement for a building permit for these to add a, I guess depending on the size, because I understand from your last presentation, you said that some of these ARUs could be as large as the house itself, if I remember correctly?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there will be a requirement for it to adhere to the building code and fire code and other matters. So a building permit would be required, and that could be also screened through the registration component.
And can an ARU be as large as the house, or is that something I just dreamed up?
No, that's correct. An ARU can be as large as the house, as the primary residential unit, or smaller.
Any further questions, Mayor Latham?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So I guess I'm just wondering, with our consolidated zoning bylaw, why are we, I guess my first question, why are we doing this now knowing that we have a consolidated zoning bylaw coming forward? Is this just an opportunity to put it in place faster? Because I believe it's important. And once our consolidated zoning bylaw gets put in place, will these changes obviously roll over into that bylaw so that it's consistent across the entire city? It just seems like we're trying to fit this into 17 different zoning bylaws, as you mentioned, which isn't easy. And I'm just wondering, why do it now? Why not wait a little while until our consolidated zoning bylaw is done? But go ahead.
Whoever wants to answer.
Leah speak to this one.
Why, thank you, Anna. Mr. Chair, through you to the mayor. That's absolutely correct. We had the opportunity to do this policy-specific amendment ahead of all of the other sort of policy considerations that are flowing into the rural zoning bylaw amendment project. Of course, we had the added impetus from Bill 108, recent changes to the Planning Act through that provincial piece of legislation. And added to that, over the past couple of years, we've seen an increasing interest and I'll even say demand from the public interested in these types of units, as well as an increasing number of inquiries, property inquiries, but also pre-consultation applications, and then ultimately zoning bylaw amendment applications. So in an effort to sort of streamline the process for the public and to get these things out there and built and cut through some red tape, we thought, why not grab the opportunity now? And we will, of course, be working together with our team at WSP and our internal team working on the rural zoning bylaw project to ensure that these provisions fold right into that rural zoning bylaw review as well.
I
No.
might just add another point, if I may. In the summer, I presented with respect to the changes to the provincial policy statement 2020. And at that presentation, I made a number of recommended next steps for the policy shop and for the planning division to accomplish before a municipal comprehensive review, and just the amount of workload associated with that. And additional residential units were one of the things that was recommended to pursue as soon as possible in advance of our growth management strategy work.
No, thank you for that, and I agree, and I'm glad you did, because I think it is important. We hear about it a lot. People wanting to take care of other family members and find affordable places to live, or just rent something out so they can afford to stay in their homes. We hear it as well as a council, so I'm glad you did put it forward, and I appreciate the report. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you, through you. I want to thank you for being so forward-thinking. This is pretty awesome. So thank you for, taking the bull by the horns and moving forward on this. This is fantastic for our municipality. I have a question about, I think it was you're allowed 2 ARUs and then a garden suite, but the garden suite has to be removed depending on the agreement between 10 and 20 years. Now, is the garden suite like a proper building, or is it a mobile home, or is it a tiny home, or what's the category of a garden suite?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a garden suite is defined as a dwelling unit. So it's my understanding it would be more of a modular home, not a mobile home. And it is a tool that's been available for a number of years under the Planning Act, and previously it was up to 10 years. However, it has been relatively recently changed up to potentially 20 years. So that's where the timing reference was made from.
Great, thank you very much.
Great. Once again, thanks for the report. Wonderful report. Just a couple questions. First of all, was there very much of a turnout for the public meetings? I've just wondered. Was there much interest in the public meetings that you've held, to whomever held them?
Mr. Chair, so I'll just touch on that. Our first statutory public meeting last month, we had some interest come in via email inquiries, as well as some activity on the website. And then, of course, with today's public meeting being the second statutory public meeting, we did also generate some phone calls and email communications from it. So some interest, I will say that much.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's just hard to monitor when everybody's Zooming, so you don't really, it's like an open public meeting. The other question was, you could have as many as 6 units with the, on the same property. Pardon me? Yeah, 6. Yeah, 6. Do you anticipate that? I know it's new territory for everyone. You kind of anticipate the 3 units and perhaps the 4 units, but the 6, I was unfamiliar with that. And do you think there might be some possibilities, or in the public meetings, was there any interest in that, I guess I would ask?
On that note in particular, Mr. Chair, there actually was some interest in existing rental tenancy in existing semi-detached units as a housing typology, which is why we took an extra keen look at how ARUs could effectively work on lots like that. So yes to the interest, but I will add that across the city, we don't have currently that many semi-detached dwelling units set up as rental units. So meaning not severed down the common wall and each half of the semi being on its own lot of record. So in that sense, I don't anticipate an overwhelming response to ARUs on lots that have semi-detached units only because of our fabric being what it is.
And of course, you'd need a fair bit of space as well, too, so all things considered. Okay, well, thanks for members of the committee. Any further questions of the authors of the report? Well done. There's a recommendation in our report today. Pardon me? Oh, does anyone else wish to speak to it? If has been watching today, does anybody else watching today wish to speak to this application? Nobody's registered, but Joel just reminded me there might be somebody watching that'd like to speak to it. Seeing none, there's a recommendation in our report. Councillor Vail.
As printed.
Second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. I'll just read that in case the people are watching. Is that bylaws to implement the proposed official plan amendments substantially in the form attached to be referred to council for adoption, and the zoning bylaw amendment in the Oak Ridges Moraine bylaw 2005-133 substantially in the form attached Appendix G be referred to council for adoption, and the zoning bylaw amendment to the city's 18 zoning bylaws substantially in the form attached to Appendix H, Report Plan 2020-057 be referred to council for adoption, and that the additional residential units bylaw substantially in the form attached in Appendix 1, Report Plan 2020-057 be referred to council for adoption, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute any documents required by the approval of these applications. Thank you, and that basically ends our public meeting. No deputations, no correspondence, I believe, is there, Joel, other than the ones we received already? So the next part of the meeting is a report, and report by the Three Lakes Development to enter into subdivision agreement, plan of subdivision, former Rokeby subdivision. Richard, you're up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
All those are there, yeah.
This application has a long history dating back to the late 1980s. It has morphed into, it was intensified in 2011 when the previous owners came forward and tightened the subdivision up to allow additional residential units within the development. Three Lakes Developments has purchased it approximately 4 years ago, and they are now moving ahead with the first phase. The way the approval went was due to servicing constraints of the 250 odd units, only 100 could be developed because of servicing constraints. Those constraints will be dealt with, I understand, in the next couple of years to allow further development to proceed. In the meantime, Three Lakes is moving ahead with their first phase of 68 units only. The reason for that being is that from a financial perspective, it only makes sense because the first 68 units are phased in such a manner that they require only one stormwater management pond on the west side of the development. If they wanted to develop the whole first 100, they would have to build a second storm pond, which doesn't really make a lot of financial sense at this point in time. So they've elected to go with the 68 units as proposed. The development meets all the relevant provincial policies. So the growth plan, the provincial policy statement. The development also conforms with our official plan, and it complies with the zoning bylaws. So you can see that there's 68 units. So it's basically along the southern street. That's where the development will be occurring. And there will be a second access, I believe, out here as well. So this is where the development is occurring for this area. And then this area here is going to be the stormwater management pond. The applicant has also requested deferral from the development charges policy. That is currently being reviewed between engineering or corporate assets and our finance department. And we have reached agreement on everything in the draft subdivision agreement that is attached to this report. We are also very close to getting the subdivision plan registered. There's just a couple of things we just have to finalize. And then I believe the subdivision plan will be available for registration. Part of the push for getting this approved at this point in time is that if they want to connect to our services, they're best to do that in January or February, just given the proximity and the fact that the services within Front Street are underwater because of the high water table in that area. The application has been circulated to all departments, and everyone has had a chance to review the subdivision agreement. Based on the contents of this report, staff respectfully recommend that it proceed on to council for adoption. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard, for that report. This is, we've been kind of anticipating this property. This property's been talked about for a long time, so it's great to see that they're coming forward at this time. Members of the committee, do you have any questions of, pardon me? This is just a report. Yeah. So anyways, if any members of the committee have any questions of Richard this time, Kathleen?
Thank you. So Richard, they should be able to move forward if it all passes today in January on this project?
Through the chair, yes, that's the goal. We just have to get, as I say, get the monies into the finance department. They're working on clearing all the conditions as well that they need to clear. Then we have to get the reference plan registered and the agreement signed. So that's the goal, is that this process gets completed in January, February at the latest. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I know that this development has been years and years in the making and different owners. So thank you for pushing this through and working with this developer. This is great. Thank you.
Mayor Latham?
No, I just wanted to add what Kathleen said. I know Richard compliment you on pushing this forward. I know it was there was some challenges from the applicant's perspective regarding the pandemic and just getting all the pieces together. And I know that you were a big part of responsible for trying to hit some of the timelines and pushing it forward and pushing the applicant to get their reports in. I know there's some great interest in the community for this development, so I just wanted to say thanks for doing that. And it's here, and certainly happy to give you the motion to. You want me to read it? Because you're going to read it anyways, aren't you?
Yeah, you can read it.
I'll move that the report, Three Lakes Development, be received, that the subdivision agreement for the Three Lakes Development, former Rokeby, City of Kawartha Lakes, substantially in the form attached as Appendix C to Report Plan 2020-058 be approved by Council, that the recommended payment of development charges as outlined in the draft subdivision agreement contained in Appendix C to Report Plan 2020-058 be received and approved by Council, and the Mayor and Clerk be authorized to execute any documents and agreements required by the approval of this agreement. So I'll move that.
Second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any further discussion? That's carried. All in favor? Just testing. Anyways, thanks very much. And once again, thanks, Richard, for the work there. Richard, there's typical after it goes to the council meeting, there is an appeal period too, right?
Not with these reports.
Just on the other.
The zoning's in place, the subdivision's in place, so there's nothing to appeal on these reports. It's simply a status report, and we ask that you endorse the subdivision agreement. That's really the purpose of these reports.
Great.
I would also like to add. With all these reports and the subdivision agreements, there's a lot of work that's done by the engineering department. So I would also like to acknowledge that, because there's a lot of there's a lot of coordination that they do as part of the process. So I would like to acknowledge that as well.
Thanks. We'll pass that on. Thanks very much, Richard. Okay, the next one is the report from the Economic Recovery Task Force by Emily Turner. You're up, Emily.
Hello. Joel, I had sent a PowerPoint. There it is. Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So I'll just go through the PowerPoint with you briefly. This is really just a summary of the report, and I'll add some just additional information to go through what's going on with the Economic Recovery Task Force and the two planning related programming aspects that I'm going to talk about today. Great. So the task force itself, for those of you who haven't been on the task force, because I know there's a couple people on this committee who are also on the task force, it was established in May 2020, and it was intended to provide advice and recommendations to council and staff to stimulate local economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. So there's a focus on 3 strategic areas. So one of those was critical infrastructure investments, planning and development stimulus was the second, and then business recovery and support was the third. So the ones that I'm going to be talking about today are under that planning and development stimulus umbrella. So the task force members, I just have a list of them up on the screen for those of you who aren't involved with it. So Mayor Letham is the chair, and Deputy Mayor O'Reilly is the vice chair of that. Councillor Seymour Fagan, Councillor Seymour Fagan and Councillor Vale are also on the task force, and then Chris Marshall, the Director of Development Services, and Juan Rojas, the Director of Engineering and Corporate Assets, are our staff on that task force. And then there's 4 community members who are on that as well, Bjorn Alfredson, Jill Quast, Mark Wilson, and Tom Phillips. So out of the Economic Recovery Task Force, a development subcommittee was struck to try and come up with some recommendations around that planning and development stimulus piece. So 3 recommendations came out of that. The first was the fast tracking of a number of shovel-ready planning applications to ensure that those developments could get started as quickly as possible. And many of those are rolling along quite well at the moment, and a presentation was done to council on that a little while ago as well, so I'm not going to be touching on that today. The other 2 were the creation of a planning application spreadsheet, which identifies all the ongoing applications along with the planner who's working on it and what stage the application is at. And then the third was the development and implementation of the Kawartha Lakes Concierge Pilot Program. So the planning application spreadsheet, this is an internal document that was created by planning staff. And it was created to assist with tracking planning applications. And the intention of that was to assist with customer service requests and also with scheduling. So knowing when things were coming to this committee or also going to committee of adjustment when comments needed to come in for those sorts of things. So all that scheduling is in the spreadsheet. So every new and current application is added into the spreadsheet as well as its status, the planner working on it. And so it can be easily accessed by staff when they're getting requests for information on those files. And it can be accessed by different planners as well. So even if you're not the person working on the file, you can look at it easily enough. And that was attached to the report that you received today. And then the next piece is the Concierge Program, and this is the piece that I've been working on. So this is a 9-month pilot program, and it's intended to help guide applicants through the planning process with the assistance of an economic development officer. So for the pilot process, this is me. Once we get out of the pilot program, if we see that it's successful, we would be expanding that to other economic development officers depending on the scope of that. But we'll get to that once the pilot is over with. So we're initially focusing on site plan applications just to see how it goes. And after 9 months, it'll be evaluated to gauge its effectiveness and the potential to be continued or expanded with other types of applications. So once the 9 months is up, we'll be checking in with our applicants who've gone through the program to see their experience, how effective it was for them, and whether or not it seemed to move things along more quickly for them to see if it'll be a useful tool for us going forward. So with the Concierge Program, there's currently 5 applications in it. So in your report, it says 3, but since the report was written, we've had 2 more come into the program, which is great. So they are a proposed multi-unit warehouse at 203 St. David Street in Lindsay, the proposed hotel on Angeline Street in Lindsay, the expansion of the Canadian Tire in Fenelon Falls, Then the two new ones which have come in were the condominium development on West Street in Fenland Falls, and then also the Lindsay Exhibition Campground. And that's it. So that's the brief overview in Cole's notes of the concierge program and a brief little bit on the planning application spreadsheet. So if the committee has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to discuss those with you.
Well, thanks very much, Emily, for that report, and thanks very much for taking on this project. I realize you work for Heritage, but it's so great to have you on doing this as well. So I hope that this is reflected in your pay as well, sort of thing. So, anyways, over and above the call of duty. Anyways, members of the committee, do you have any questions of Emily on her report? Go ahead, Mike.
I have a couple of questions. They might be better for Richard or for Chris. Emily, you're doing the concierge, so and you're just working with people that have a site plan before staff right now. But
that's right.
The other two, the fast tracking, if you're not in charge of that, who is the staff person? And who's the staff person that's looking after the planning application, the spreadsheets?
I think Chris and Richard would be best suited to answer that.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and just to clarify on the attached spreadsheet, it wouldn't have been sort of possible or feasible to show you the entire spreadsheet. So Jonathan Horowitz did sort of shrink it down a bit and took out some of the columns. Unfortunately, one of the columns he took out was the planners working on the applications, but normally those spreadsheets, when you look at it on the computer, on an Excel spreadsheet, they do show the planner working on the file. So apologize that was missed in the shrinking down of the spreadsheet to allow it to be more digestible or visible in a PDF form. So just to clarify that. In terms of the fast tracking, there were a number of applications during the pandemic that when the pandemic happened that were being referred back to planning. So as you saw today, there were a number of applications, including the 11-story apartment building, in which there was a need to go back and get further information, and that application is projected or proposed to come back to a future planning advisory committee. So what we did during the pandemic, as we weren't holding planning advisory committees, is when staff felt that the application was ready to go forward, we got approval from council to bring those referrals, the ones that were referred back to planning advisory committee, to go straight to council. So I think we had about 4 or 5 of those rezoning applications that went straight to council as opposed to going back to the planning advisory committee. One that just comes to mind is the 200 plus unit apartment building that is proposed, or it was approved behind the Loblaws store, between Loblaws and the Wilson Fields. I think that was an 8-story apartment building. It was originally projected or proposed to go back to the planning advisory committee, but that one went straight to council. So that's just an example of how we fast track those.
Emily says there are quite a few that are being fast tracked now. I think she said they were rolling along. So those are the ones who have come to planning to PAC before, and now they got returned to staff. So you have a few of those. Maybe we should talk later if you can point them out on the tracking sheet. I was unable to find that.
So just to clarify, the fast tracking was only happening during the pandemic. Once we came out of the pandemic and the planning advisory committee meetings were rescheduled and back up and running again, we no longer went through that process of fast tracking them through straight to council.
Okay, so we don't need to do that because PAC's meeting on a regular basis now.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. I wasn't sure. And the shovel-ready, that was for the city's own plans, and one was the Fenland reconstruction, and so those were the shovel-ready ones. They weren't public shovel-ready. They were just that you were fast-tracking?
Yeah, and we were trying to bring those applications. I mean, we were calling those more or less shovel-ready projects too, because they were finishing off the zoning process during the pandemic. So I guess there's two labels to it. We were fast-tracking as well as creating shovel-ready projects by shortening the time frame for the processing.
My other question was about the tracking sheet. When a planner is listed on this, if a member of the public wants to, because this is a public document now, because you presented it here publicly, so if the public sees this and they want to get back to their planner, do they go directly to the planner and ask what's going on? Or is there somebody that's going to be helping through this process? Because the pandemic is still on, and people are still struggling. So is there going to be somebody to oversee this tracking sheet and to take inquiries from the public?
So the way it works now is every application that we process has a planner associated with it. And those planners present to you in the Planning Advisory Committee. If the applicant has any questions about their file, they have the name and phone number and contact information of the planner that's working on that file. And there's no reason why they wouldn't know who their planner is that's working on the file, because they would have worked with them right from the beginning of them applying, right through to deeming the application complete and right through the process. So the applicant always has that opportunity to speak to the planner in place. In terms of the concierge service and the work that Emily's doing to help with some of the site plan applications, like I say, we said this is just a sort of trial balloon to kind of see how it would work, rather than dump 100 applications on Emily's shoulders and have her try and stick handle, facilitate all of those applications. We thought we would start with a manageable number and see how that goes before we take it any further. Yeah, that's the way it works for the application process.
Thank you very much. I'm very strongly in support of what you're doing. I think that the public does. I participated in a couple of the presentations that we had, the public consultations, and I know that the public is really, really concerned about still communications not being as strong as they should be, not knowing where their project is. There's seeming delays because they don't understand all the complications of the process. So I think this is all these projects are going to help. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Mayor Latham.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to add to that, the discussions at the Economic Recovery Task Force, when we talked about this spreadsheet, was to really give the overall picture of, number one, the workload, right? I mean, you can look through this and see that a planner has 7 or 8 applications. It's like, okay, maybe your applicant or that member of the public sort of says, oh, you mean I'm not the only one they're working on, right? So I think it's just to give everybody a perspective, and if it's updated, we get a lot of inquiries from the public on, why is my application being held up? And you flip through this and you see, well, actually, we're waiting to hear back from the applicant on a specific report, right? So staff aren't holding it up. So it's just communication. It's just more information. It's an overall, and we felt it was a good thing that if staff can keep it up to date, and it shouldn't be a whole lot now that it's done to keep it up to date. It's good information for everybody. It's not for us to. It's really not in the planning committee's mandate to do anything with it. It's just for information, and it's not for us to sort of start going through it and, oh, by the way, Richard, this one's really important to me. Can you ignore all the rest of them and sort of focus on this one that I want? You know what I mean? I'm not directing that at you, Mike. I'm just talking in general that, you know, it's more just for overall information. And the concierge was, you know, I do think Emily could probably handle 100 applications, Chris, so I'll disagree with you there. But I do respect starting her off slowly and building up that momentum is probably a better direction to go. But, you know, again, when we talked about that communication and just, you know, giving the planners more time to plan, do their planning, and having somebody between the economic recovery perspective who can, you know, I haven't heard back from them in 2 weeks. Maybe Emily can follow up and the planner can focus on, you know, instead of it sort of getting put at the bottom of the pile and working on active applications, somebody's over here following up so it doesn't get lost. And I think it's just part of, you know, at our discussion at that, I'm just trying to give you some perspective from the task force conversations that we had and where this came from. And we felt it was a good, strong recommendation that'll help too. And we'll see how it rolls out over the next little while. But we were pretty excited when Richard and Chris, maybe a little reluctantly at first, got on board, but eventually we talked him into it. And Chris implemented this right in. It wasn't a council direction. He implemented it right into the work plan right away. And I think it's going to be a good thing moving forward. So, yeah, thanks.
Kathleen?
Yes, thank you, through you. Thank you for all the work on this. And Emily, yes, I think you could handle more. You're pretty awesome, boy. I'm just wondering, will this document be available on the web?
It wasn't in, sorry, through the mayor to you, Councillor Seymour Fagan. It's not intended to be a public document per se, and to put up on the website and put in the newspaper or anything like that. It's really meant for our internal use mostly, so that we can track what's going on, as Emily said, schedule for upcoming committee of adjustment meetings and planning advisory committee meetings, and for staff to be able to answer the public's questions, so that even the administrative assistants, if they get a call about you know, a particular application, or even myself, sometimes I get you know, calls directed to me and people are asking about a particular application. I'll just be able to pull this up and be able to tell people where it's at. So you know, I don't really want to make it a document that we sort of send out to the public generally. I think the idea was that we would bring it to the Planning Advisory Committee on a quarterly basis, or you know, a couple of times a year, just so that they could see where we're at. But yeah, I don't think it was intended to be out to the public on as a general thing.
Just further than that, I get your comments at this stage and whatever, but would it not be better at some point to have a version of this that is a public document that is on the website? I just look at that as you're talking about phone calls that are going to you and phone calls that are going to planners and even to Emily or whoever eventually is going to manage it. And if people, a lot of times, all they're looking for is an answer as to where it is. I'm going to guess, based on my business background and what we've done electronically ourselves, the more that you put out there that they can do on their own, your call volume drops. Like you by putting that on the website, you could drop your call volume 75%.
I don't know, maybe Richard wants to comment, but
Go ahead, Richard.
Sure, through the chair. I think there are some things where call volumes do drop. If you have information out, like for example, we've put all of our zoning bylaws online, and I think that's helped a fair bit with a reduction in call volume. I think with applications, though, I think it's probably more so that they, you know, some people really want to talk to somebody, you know, especially if it's a consent or a minor variance. it's near and dear to a person's heart. So they really want to talk to the planner that's handling it and sort of get an understanding of where it's at and what the issues are, and most importantly, when it's going to be scheduled for a hearing and when it's going to get approved. Other larger applications, for example, the application that we heard today for the apartment building, they've got consultants, and they're in contact with our planners directly to ask questions. So I'm not necessarily sure that I would agree that it would drop our call volumes that much. I think it probably provide a bit of overview, but I think we'd probably still find that people would call us directly or call Emily directly on a lot of the applications, or email us as well.
Thanks, Richard, for the information. Kathleen?
Thank you, Richard. Will council have access to this so we're not calling you constantly to find out where things are? Because there's 8 of us, 9 of us.
Yes, that is the idea, that you would have access to this chart and you could take a look at it at your leisure whenever you wanted to, and we will keep it up to date. As I say, when after this committee meeting, I'll be going in and updating my thing on the chart as well. So we've got a dedicated person now that is updating the chart when new applications come in. So that person automatically charts everything, sets it up for the planner, and then the planners go in and update all the milestones as they happen. So it is getting updated. So, but it will be available. It is available for council. I believe it's on the SharePoint site, so it is available for you.
Any further, Jason?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a comment to Mayor Metham and Director Marshall. This is something I think would have been helpful when I went through a process several years ago. And the fact there's a concierge, I think, is just an unbelievable idea. Just a comment or a thought, maybe try to find somebody that's a second-time applicant going through, because then you have a marker point whether it is an improvement in the service with having a concierge versus a first time through. Because I know a lot of the applications are first time through. People don't have the understanding of what it actually takes and the time duration. So if you do have a second time applicant, I think that would be unbelievably helpful. Thank you.
You speaking from experience, Jason?
Could I add something to that? We actually do have a second time marker on this one. The DNM Muskoka file that's going through the site plan process. That's the second time in Fenelon Falls. The first time was for a small condo project on the east side of the river. This is on the west side of the river. So that's actually a really good point. We should ask them for feedback. Sort of, how is the concierge? How does the concierge process differ from the non-concierge process? So that's an excellent point. Thank you,
Jason.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think that's an awesome idea. Just a few spot points to see what he thinks on this. Like I really like the fact that I think you're going to build capacity with your planners by having a concierge, because then if you have someone that's in the middle of a file, they're not get pulled away to answer something on a counter or do something that is less important to the file they're working on. Let the planners plan and have an administrative person. So I would really love to see this be a full-time position for everyone in the planning department.
Any further questions? Maybe we'll have to wait for that extra compensation I suggested there, Emily, after the 6-month evaluation, if that's all right. But anyways, thanks for the good work, Emily, and for Chris and Richard for input. It's a great step forward. There's a recommendation in our reports to receive for information. Do I have a mover? Councillors Vale and Councillor Seymour Fagan. All those in favor? That's carried. Thanks again. The next report is a report from Christina Sissons, Municipal Infrastructure Design Guidelines. Christine, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Through you to the committee, I'm pleased to report that as part of our annual review of our municipal guidelines that are available on our website, certainly having information on our website is important and has become instrumental in people being able to move forward during this very unprecedented year with the pandemic. Having the information available online seems to have reached people and seems to provide a great opportunity for us to get that across. Having said that, we do believe it's our responsibility to review these guidelines annually and to ensure that they're current, to ensure that there are any improvements that we need to make, et cetera. So as a result of that and through this report, we are pleased to indicate that for the most part, there have been no regulatory legislative changes. The changes made through the Ontario provincial standards have not affected any of our guidelines, any of our standard details, et cetera, that we provide. We did notice a few typographical errors, and I thank my staff and my team for that. Certainly when we're creating these documents, there's always an opportunity for some error, and we found those. So the two items that we really are changing that we feel are really in conjunction with our strategic plan and in order to be more open and transparent is certainly for the top course asphalt or the top lift that we're doing, we can no longer accept patching during this exercise. We think it's important that we have, you know, one stream of asphalt at that time, the top course. These are the ways, by putting this into the municipal guidelines directly, we feel like we're being open and transparent, as I say, so that people will understand and know they can be fiscally responsible for keeping an eye on the base. And it will also help staff in terms of determining what the next steps are when we do go to get the permission letter for the top course. And then the other item aligned with the strategic plan as well is that for water quality purposes, we are now recommending that for any oil grit separators that are being proposed, that we follow the federal testing evaluation. And that is an evaluation that's gone on across both Canada and the US as a matter of fact. And that is related to the efficacy or the efficiency of those oil grit separators in terms of the amount of sediment that they can remove. So that's another protocol that we would like recommended when engineers are going through their design proposals for the city in terms of an oil grit separator. So those are the major changes. And as I say, we're very pleased that we've been able to manage this particular project of keeping an eye on our infrastructure guidelines while we've been using them, training new staff with them, and taking questions from the public. So if you have any questions for me.
Thanks very much for the report, Christine, and the update on the two items that are kind of new to us. Members of the committee, any questions of Christine at this time? Seeing none, job well done. There's a recommendation. What's committee's wishes and the recommendations? Councillor Vail?
As printed.
Do I have a seconder? Mayor Letham? And that the staff be directed to continue to update and add to the information available to the city's website, including templates and details to facilitate engineering design submissions for development, and staff be directed to continue to monitor for any communication improvements for any current legislation and regulatory enhancements, required updates to the existing guidelines on the city's website. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. So you're up next again, Christine, on the subdivision agreement template updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Again, it gives me great pleasure to explain that what we do on an annual basis is review the works that are before us. We look at what has happened in the previous year. We look at what's being proposed this year. And certainly through the Economic Recovery Task Force, the working groups, and our discussions with various developers in our community, it has become apparent that we need to be as clear as we possibly can be, but also as fiscally responsible as we can be. And we need communication. The communication is integral for not only the existing residential community, any of our partners in through the development of these subdivisions, et cetera. So through the template, what we have looked at is let's hit the nail on the head with money first. Financially, we want to be transparent and as fair to the developer as possible while maintaining as much security as is necessary for the security of the city. And in that way, we've looked at the applicable HST. It has been brought to our attention several times that the municipality, if we were to take some of these projects over, we would realize a rebate on HST. So the cost estimate that is attached to the report reflects that, the applicable HST for the parties. In this way, they're not putting up additional security. So we're trying to alleviate some of that financial burden. And with some of the larger projects that we are seeing now, this has actually resulted in a bigger number, as you can well imagine. Also, on the financial perspective, we are now looking, we have to look annually at the development charge process. This changes on a very regular basis. And so we've updated the language in this document as well, in the current template that's attached to your project. Another item for the financial side of things is the grading deposit. Previously, the subdivision agreement template had required a $3,000 deposit for any lot which was not developed or built out at the time we were looking at assumption. Some of our subdivisions are taking a long time to assume. It seems to be fiscally more responsible to actually encourage through project management, through communication, again, through clarity and transparency, as I've indicated, that we get these municipal infrastructure projects actually assumed. And if we have vacant lots that are still not built upon on those subdivisions, then it would be more favorable that they be completed through the infill process, and our grading review, et cetera, would still remain the same as per any residential unit, and they would have to follow the overall grade plan. So because we have a lot of security in the system already from the way that we already have to review these projects, we're now looking at actually alleviating the grading deposit. We haven't implemented this per se, but at the same time, by not having all the lots built out, that seems to have taken the subdivisions longer to get to an assumption perspective. So the developers have been, have waited until they've had all the lots developed prior to asking for assumption. We'd like to move that whole process forward, as I say, provide for our residents actual assumed infrastructure, give them timelines that they can see coming. So that's another improvement that we are looking for in this particular rendition of the draft of the subdivision agreement. Again, these are the items that are more related to the engineering side of things. In terms of clarity, we've had to explain that the timelines when the engineers are assuming or suggesting what their timelines are, we're trying to make sure that they understand that's for all the public services. That includes the sidewalks, it includes the streetlights, everything else that's part of the municipal infrastructure. And through the construction management plans that we are requiring of them now, we want them to be very specific about improved communication. This will only benefit everyone that's involved in the communication. Everybody gets a phone call about a project. In this way, we want the developer and his consulting team, his development team, his engineers, his contractors, everybody to realize that they do have a responsibility in the communication process as well. So that's why we've highlighted that in this current draft of the subdivision agreement template. And yes, low impact development, our environment is always important. And we have included the warning clauses as an addition. One is the noise bylaw that comes up as a result of some of the construction practices that happen, but also wording to include infiltration trenches. The majority of the subdivision agreements coming before you, including the one that Richard has brought to you today, include low impact opportunities and include infiltration trenches. These infiltration trenches to date are being provided for only on the private property side. But as a result of that, for clarity, for the new residents that are going to be buying and living in these homes, we want them to understand what is required with these infiltration trenches on their property. So we're looking for clarity in the subdivision agreement, in the warnings clauses. This is to be included in all the purchase and sale agreements. So in this way, we can already start to educate our public. Again, as I say, this is all in line with strategic plan from our perspective to be, as open and transparent as possible to protect our environment and to provide an exceptional quality of life for our new residents. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. There's a lot of work went into that, Christine, and I presume that the red ink on pages 287 to 270 to 267, 270, that's the new and updated version. There's things in there about storm water ponds. Is that just standard, or is that something? It said stormwater management pond and storm management pond plan and cleanouts. Is that something that wasn't standard before, or is this just updating?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, the key is to provide additional wording that is clear to the developers. So while this was perhaps inherent in the document, we're trying to be a little bit more explicit with what's required, because we have developers that aren't as seasoned and perhaps are not aware of all of the requirements when it comes to the decommissioning of existing ponds or getting the ponds assumed. So this is to provide clarity for not only the developer, the owner, but also for the development team, the engineer, the contractor, et cetera, in next steps. So yes, we are trying to add wording to take a legal document and make it as clear as possible for the parties, again, with the engineering conditions primarily.
Great, thank you. Mayor Latham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christina, in the actual report, in your fourth bullet, it just, everything kind of cross-references and makes sense to me, except this one bullet where you've got further to the update last year to include the annual updates to the city, example, financial securities. This requirement is being recommended as one item that could lead to default under the agreement. What is this requirement? I'm not understanding what it's referring to, and I'm wondering if you can cross-reference it to the subdivision agreement. It's kind of hanging out there and doesn't really relate to anything to me.
Which page are you in, Mayor?
Page 211.
211, okay.
The fourth bullet where it says further to the update, this requirement, which requirement are they referring to?
Oh, through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor, yes. The item that is in the current language for default is that they are to continue to provide updates to us. That was an idea from last year that we had brought forward. In this way, urban subdivisions typically take in our community 5 to 10 years from the registration of the M plan to assumption. The rural can take 10 to 20 years. So from our perspective, last year we had come forward with the recommendation that we have annual updates. In this way, we could provide the communication venue for the, where are you, developer, with your project? How is the security engineer? And then the city would review that information. We've been doing a lot more project management, a lot more reach out to all of the developers that are currently, working on subdivisions in our community. So through that, we had that item also in place in default in terms of those updates being required. And so from our perspective, we really want to make sure that we're being fair and transparent when it comes to what is the default, right? You can't make a recommendation for a condition and then say not have it included as part of the default. Does that help or make sense? We're just trying to, again, that transparency and communication.
That's good, thank you.
Members of the committee, any further questions of Christine? Seeing none, we have a recommendation in our package today. What's committee's Kathleen? As printed. We have a seconder, Jason. And that recommendation is that the city subdivision agreement and cost estimate schedule template be updated and amended as outlined in Appendix A and B, respectively, to report ENG 2020-015, and the staff be directed to continue to monitor for any improvements to the language in the template of the subdivision agreement to ensure that there are opportunities to refine the timelines and clarity of language with the development process. All those in favor? That's carried. And I believe that is the end of all our reports today. And just need a motion to adjourn. Mike Barkwell and Jason. All those in favor?